There's not much on this hillside to suggest heavy industry. All you see is open land and the Lake Parkway. There's even less here to suggest violence. The Bayview neighborhood is quiet today. The only evidence is underground, but this is where Milwaukee's first major factory stood. It was also right here that the bloodiest labor disturbance in Wisconsin's history took place. The story of that factory and of that conflict is the story of industries and immigrants.
Milwaukee grew up as a classic port city. Farm products, particularly wheat, were shipped out. Finished goods, from plows to pincushions, were shipped in. But some envisioned a larger future for their hometown. An 1871 promoter suggested a dramatic change.
At present, we are sending our hard lumber east to get it back as furniture and agricultural implements. We ship ores to St. Louis and New York to pay the cost of bringing it back in shot, type, pipe, sheet lead, white lead, paint, etc. We give rags for paper and hides for boots and harness and iron ore for stoves, and our consumers all the while are paying the double cost of this unnecessary transportation.
As Milwaukee matured, it made increasing sense to add the value here. The city was still tied to the countryside, but it began to process raw materials instead of just shipping them. Crops, livestock, even the earth itself were turned into products that consumers could use. The result was a transformation. The growth of processing industries attracted immigrant workers by the thousands. Industries and immigrants together carried the city to new heights of population and prosperity. They also pushed it to the point of murderous conflict. Ore was a beginning. The hamlet of Iron Ridge, 50 miles northwest of Milwaukee, was once the heart of an important iron mining district. All but forgotten today, the mines yielded 3 million tons of iron-rich rock before they closed during World War I. The promise of ore nearby was a major reason for the emergence of Milwaukee's first heavy industry. The Milwaukee Iron Company opened on the lakeshore at Bayview in 1868. Within 5 years, it was the second largest producer of railroad rails in America, and it employed more than 1,000 men. Mill work was not for the faint of heart. A reporter visiting during a summer heat wave was amazed.
None but the men who have worked in these great hives of human industry, among immense furnaces and molten and seething metal, have any conception of the heat which a mill hand has to endure while at his hard and tedious labor.
The reporter expressed surprise that the workers didn't melt. The iron mill may have been a hell of a place to work, but it literally put Bayview on the map. First as a suburb, and then, when local residents wanted city services, as a Milwaukee neighborhood. Bayview is still filled with landmarks from the mill era. Cottages built for workers and their families. The original village well, still a source of free mineral water. Puddler's Hall, the home of an early trade union. And several saloons patronized by thirsty mill hands. This one is now a popular Serbian restaurant. The iron mill did much more than create a neighborhood. It marked Milwaukee's turn from shipping to processing, from commerce to industry. But farm products were even more important than ore. Milwaukee had earned its first fame as a shipper of wheat. By the 1870s, it enjoyed new prominence as a miller of flour. Local mills ground out more than 1 million barrels in a good year, making Milwaukee one of the nation's leading producers. Wisconsin livestock created two even larger industries, meatpacking and tanning. Thousands of hogs and cattle were shipped to Milwaukee and disassembled each year. Meatpackers specialized in the insides of hogs. By 1879, packing was Milwaukee's largest industry. The patriarch of the Packers was John Plankinton. Born in Delaware, he was a mathematical whiz and a strict Calvinist who believed that his prosperity was preordained. Plankinton bought a cow the day he arrived in 1844 and parlayed that investment into one of America's largest packing houses. Plankinton's first partner was Frederick Leighton, a proper Englishman with a passion for fine art. Leighton went into business for himself and prospered, earning enough money to endow Milwaukee's first public gallery. His collection of fine paintings stood in vivid contrast to the slaughterhouses that were the source of his wealth. But Frederick Leighton was an unusually generous man. By the time he died at the age of 92, the packer had nearly exhausted his fortune. John Plankinton also served as mentor to a young Irishman named Patrick Cudahy. Beginning in poverty, Cudahy eventually bought out Plankinton and followed him as Milwaukee's leading packer. If meat packers sold the insides of hogs, leather tanners specialized in the outsides of cattle. As Wisconsin became America's dairyland, surplus cows came to Milwaukee in droves, and their hides ended up in everything from shoes to saddles. The tanners were just as dependent on northern Wisconsin's forests. Mountains of tan bark stripped from hemlock trees rose beside every plant. The bark was chipped and stewed to produce tannin, the compound that turned hides to leather. The tanning process generated smells that were almost overpowering at close range. A pair of German immigrants, Guido Pfister and Frederick Vogel, led the field both locally and nationally. They built a series of plants around the city, with the largest in Walker's Point. Pfister and Vogel's chief competitors were two more Germans, Albert Trostel and August Galloon. Milwaukee tanners together finished more than 500,000 hides every year in the 1880s, shipping most of them to the great shoe factories of New England. By 1890, Milwaukee was the largest producer of tanned leather on the planet. Wisconsin barley, hops, and clear cold water were the main ingredients in Milwaukee's most celebrated product, beer. The output of local breweries rose 20-fold between 1865 and 1885. Much of it was consumed in Milwaukee, and fleets of horse-drawn beer wagons kept local saloons supplied with suds. But some brewers had broader ambitions. Investing in bottling plants and refrigerated rail cars, they began to sell beer from coast to coast. Frederick Pabst, the former lake captain, led the way. By 1874, his nose for quality and flair for promotion had made Pabst's brewery the largest in America. His closest Milwaukee competitor was Schlitz, whose plant sprawled across a hillside just north of downtown. Valentine Blatz's brewery on the east side of the river was Milwaukee's third largest. And fourth place in the 1870s went to Franz Falk's Bavaria Brewery. Perched on the south rim of the Menominee Valley, it served as the foundation for another Falk enterprise we'll visit later. Frederick Miller was one of the city's smaller producers, but his company would outlast and outgrow them all. Every Milwaukee brewery worker enjoyed a unique fringe benefit: free beer. In 1886, the average Schlitz employee put down more than a gallon of his own product every day. One more industry depended on the soil itself. Milwaukee's early settlers found that the calcium-rich local clay produced attractive cream-colored bricks. By 1880, they were being turned out at the rate of 15 million a year and shipped across the country. The bricks gave Milwaukee an enduring nickname, the Cream City, and a building material that has stood the test of time.
The great industries of the post-Civil War years were all processing industries. They took products of the earth and turned them into something else. Ore became rails. Wheat became flour. Hogs were turned into hams, hides into leather, barley into beer, and clay into Cream City bricks. In every case, Milwaukee was still tied to the land. In one respect, and one respect only, Milwaukeeans of the 19th century were like the Native Americans they displaced. They built their economy on the resources at hand.
There were also early signs of a new stage in Milwaukee's development. The local economy moved from shipping to processing after the Civil War. A few individuals made the leap from processing to manufacturing, from milling flour, for instance, to making the machines that milled flour. Edward P. Allis led the way to Milwaukee's manufacturing future. Brashly independent and absolutely fearless, Allis was one of the purest entrepreneurs Milwaukee has ever known. In 1867, the Pathfinder moved his Reliance Works from its cramped downtown location to a 20-acre site in Walker's Point. The plant specialized in flour mill machinery and small steam engines, but Allis was willing to tackle anything. Milwaukeeans of his day were sick to death of polluted drinking water, sometimes literally so. In 1871, when the city decided to tap the vast reservoir of Lake Michigan, Allis bid on the entire water system, despite the fact that he had never made a single pump or so much as a foot of pipe. He won the job, and his equipment worked perfectly. A cast-iron standpipe was installed to relieve pressure on Allis's system. In a rare fit of civic whimsy, the city enclosed the pipe in a fairy tale spire worthy of the Brothers Grimm. The North Point Water Tower remains a cherished East Side landmark today. E.P. Allis went on to even greater things in his Walker's Point shops. By 1890, he employed nearly 1,500 men, as many as the Bayview Rolling Mill. Gigantic steam engines were his particular specialty. Powering everything from blast furnaces to diamond mines, they whistled in the end of one era and the beginning of another. A few industries had nothing to do with natural resources. Their products couldn't be eaten or worn or served in a stein. One of the largest sold nothing but a promise, and this was its home. Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance built this landmark on Broadway as its home office. It stood on the site of the Newhall House, which had long been one of the finest hotels in the Midwest. The Newhall burned to the ground in a tragic 1883 fire that claimed at least 75 lives. Three years later, Northwestern Mutual put up this grand edifice on the vacant lot. It was a fitting home for the seventh largest life insurance company in America. Inside the stone fortress, white collars were the rule. The secretaries were all men, and working conditions were light years away from those found in the tanneries and packing plants.
Industry of all kinds transformed Milwaukee. It became a different kind of city. As the grain trade slowly faded from view, industry gave the economy a new engine, one that brought in new people, new problems, and new landmarks. The local landscape changed dramatically in ways that are still very much with us.
Milwaukee had been a notably low-rise city before the Civil War. In the later 1800s, its rivers and railroad tracks were lined with industries. The banks of the Milwaukee River were especially popular building sites. When the riverfront lots were taken, industrialists looked elsewhere for room to grow. Where they looked more often than not was the Menominee Valley. The sprawling wetland of the lower Menominee had long been one of Milwaukee's distinguishing features. As a city grew up around it, the valley became a sort of in-town game preserve, a popular retreat for duck hunters and fishermen. Navigation was often a challenge. The Milwaukee Sentinel described the plight of two sportsmen who got lost in 1861.
They were gone all night, and some anxiety was felt for their safety. A deputation of friends found them in the morning wildly shooting about amid the wild rice. They're both completely worn out, having rode some 18 or 20 miles without getting out of the bayou.
Industrialists had little interest in sport. To them, the valley was hundreds of acres of land, or almost land, with superb access to both rail and water transportation, after a few improvements were made. Beginning in 1869, developers buried the marsh under tons of garbage and gravel, much of it scraped from the adjoining bluffs and pushed into the valley below. The mallards and muskrats were soon evicted, the wild rice and cattails destroyed. The sinuous river was forced to flow in ruler's straight canals, creating 6 miles of dock frontage. In came the great packing plants of Plankinton and Layton, the main tannery of Pfister and Vogel, and the stockyards that supported them both. Up rose dozens of other enterprises: lumber yards, breweries, millwork plants, distilleries, coal yards, and machine shops. At the western end of the valley, near 35th Street, stood the largest of them all, the main shops of the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad. The Milwaukee Road shops made and repaired all the rolling stock for a company that owned 5,000 miles of track.
In its heyday, this valley supported the greatest concentration of industry in Wisconsin. The railroad shops alone provided nearly 2,000 jobs. Valley workers formed what was called the Bucket Brigade, streaming in every morning with their lunch pails and streaming out again at night. Industries remade the Menominee Valley after the Civil War, just as they remade Milwaukee. But it was workers, especially immigrant workers, who kept those industries running. And immigrants, of course, are the other side of the story.